No, your eyes are not deceiving you. I'm on the different side of the screen. Thought I'd try it out. Hey BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March. I'm just looking at the clock over here. And this is my bookish week for Saturday, July 16th. Now, I finished one book last week, and because it's still July, and that means on BookTube that it's Jane Austen July, I am going to talk about that book. And I also am going to talk about its adaptations. So, if you haven't figured it out yet by the thumbnail, I finished Jane Austen's Persuasion. And this was one of her two books that were published posthumously. This one and Northanger Abbey were both published after her death. And this novel is quite different than her others because this protagonist, Anne Elliot, is a much more mature main character. Anne is 27 in the novel and is still unmarried, which in Regency England was basically unheard of unless you were going to spend your life as a spinster. So, if you have not read Persuasion yet and you plan on it, you may not want to watch the video because there will be spoilers and I may be including, different things I say that I won't even realize I may be spoiling the story for you. So I'm going to try to remember that before I say them, but I just wanted to warn you in advance that that might happen. So Persuasion is the story of Anne Elliot, the Elliot family, and the book starts off as Anne, the middle child, and the most rational, sensible, down-to-earth of the three Elliot daughters, is tasked with trying to talk to her father, who has overspent and under-budgeted his estate, and now needs to move to a smaller home in a different city and rent out Kellynch Hall. So that is the beginning of the book. And Anne is the one who has been, taking over the smart aspects and the rational aspects of trying to get this all done well. So Anne Elliot has spent the last 8 years pining over Frederick Wentworth. He was a sailor at that time, and he had no wealth and no connections. And even though they were in love, Anne was persuaded by their longtime family friend and mother by proxy, Lady Russell. She was persuaded and convinced not to marry him because he did not have any prospects. But she has been in love with him and harboring that flame and that torch the entire time. Well, the couple that decides to rent Kellynch Hall is Admiral and Mrs. Croft, and Frederick Wentworth is the brother of Mrs. Croft. So eventually, he has now basically ended his Navy commission at that time, and Anne and Frederick are thrown together in all of the social circles. So there's a lot of tension, a lot of romantic tension, and a lot of anxiety on Anne's part, knowing that she will see him and she will be in the same circles as him. And she's continues to question herself about how she feels. Will he feel the same way? Does he still have feelings for her? Will he even recognize her? Will he want to talk to her? How is she going to feel? So she's built this up and has so much anxiety over this. Now, this is a typical Jane Austen novel in that there is so much satire. The Elliot family is ridiculously funny, and Austen writes them that way. She has an older sister, Elizabeth, who is kind of the spinster. She's unmarried and helps to keep her father company and manage the home, but she is extremely superficial, just like their father, vain, money obsessed, all of that. And then Anne has a younger sister, Mary, who is the only one who is married. But Mary is a very self-centered, silly, vain, hypochondriac sister with two young boys who she really doesn't care to pay attention to. And so there's all of these family dynamics that provide the humor in this particular novel. And the whole theme of Persuasion is being persuaded, whether it's being persuaded to not marry somebody you love, or being persuaded to give up your family estate and downsize, or persuaded to get out and be social and have friends and go into social circles that people are trying to persuade Anne to do. So there's all of that happening, and it develops into a fairly large group of friends that travel together and eventually start talking a lot about their futures. Because this is Jane Austen, there is an enormous amount of commentary on the single women and trying to get married. Their occupation is to find a husband. And even though Anne is the oldest one out of all of the single women, she's just not interested because she's still in love with Captain Wentworth. This is like I said, the most original of the Austens because of Anne as a character. And I really, really enjoyed this book. This was kind of off of the beaten path of Austens, and it was really interesting and fun to discover an older single woman from an Austen novel. And Anne is, as much as she is rational and practical, she's also very intelligent and independent. And she's not willing to compromise. She's not willing to compromise in who she marries. She wants to marry for love, and that's what she's been waiting for. And it's kind of it shows the arc of her growth and development as to eventually what she does and how she justifies and how she comes to terms with her present situation. It's a love story. There's a happily ever after. There is communication misunderstandings. There is revelations. There are declarations of love. And it's a typical Jane Austen novel where it's very neatly tied up, and it's a very satisfying ending. And it's kind of okay, I can put this book down, having finished it, feeling really good about how it ended, and move on. So there's definitely a payoff at the end of the book. So that is Persuasion. I don't think there were too many spoilers in the book, but now I'm going to talk about all of the adaptations that I watched. The first one is from 1995, and it starred Amanda Root and Ciarán Hinds, who I was thrilled to discover was the actor who played Mance Rayder in Game of Thrones many, many years before Game of Thrones. So it was really interesting to watch this adaptation and see a lot of the English actors that I've seen in other Jane Austen movies and other BBC productions. So that was a lot of fun. Now, I watched that movie twice. The first time, it was okay. It was I probably would have missed a lot of the nuances had I not read the book, but the second time around, this adaptation became my favorite. The actors were exceptional. It was true to the story. There was a little bit of creative license, especially at the end, but it was okay. And it's just such a great movie for the underlying romantic tension throughout the movie. And it's basically perpetrated by looks and by the actors' faces and facial expressions. And so by the end of the book, it was just so well tied up. Now, the second adaptation is 2007, starring Sally Hawkins. Now, this one took quite a bit more creative license, and this was an example of the main actress, Sally Hawkins, who plays Anne Elliot, addressing the camera directly, but she doesn't speak. You can just hear her voiceover narration. And it's kind of like, at that point, almost as if the creators of the movie thought they needed to insert that narration in order to get the viewers to understand the story. And I thought, this is a little bit of a dumbing down situation where if you did not read Persuasion before watching the movie, I think it would have been pretty understandable and pretty accessible to the general viewer of the movie. Some of the actors were very good, and I really loved what they did with the story. It stayed pretty well true to the book, and like I said, there were a few minor changes, but all in all, I think it was a smoothly produced movie, but that was my number 2 favorite. And ironically and coincidentally, the newest adaptation, which I just watched last night with Dakota Johnson, the 2022 adaptation, is my least favorite. They basically butchered the entire book. It was based on Jane Austen's Persuasion. It wasn't an adaptation of the book. So it was kind of, they gave that disclaimer in the very beginning, and it's almost as if that was justification for what they did to the story. Dakota Johnson does not have the acting qualifications or talent to evoke emotions based on her facial expressions. And she's an American actor, so she was struggling with the accents through the whole movie. You could see the different places where she would go slightly out of an English accent into an American accent, and back and forth and back and forth. And that was just really distracting and frustrating for me. She also does a couple of facial expressions really well. Sarcasm and surprise, but there's nothing in between. So there wasn't the nuance of emotion on her face. Now, the actor that played Captain Wentworth, Frederick Wentworth, was Cosmo Jarvis, and he's a very good-looking actor that seems to fit that role. But again, very, not monotone, but kind of a singular look throughout the story, throughout the movie. Doesn't say very much, and when he does, it was fairly true to the book, but there was no depth to his acting and his character. They completely changed the story around. They added lines and they added descriptions to make it appeal to a modern audience. And when it came to dumbing down the book, they made labels throughout the movie of the locations. They told people when they were going to Bath, when they were going to Lyme. And these were parts of the story that were very obvious from reading the novel. The characters acted differently, and the characters said things differently. And there were so many expressions that people in Regency England would never have said. They were very modern. There was background music, and it was modern music. It didn't fit the time period. In the movie, Anne Elliot has a pet rabbit. What's up with the rabbit? There was no rabbit in the book. And she's also a wine drinker. It's almost like, a stereotypical American soccer mom who wants to sit down with a couple glasses of wine at the end of every day. That was not Anne Elliot in the book. And so that was just a very jarring difference and something that didn't need to happen through the movie. The ending was completely different. The climaxes and the revelations throughout the movie were completely different than the book. There were important characters that were eliminated from the movie, and the romantic tension was a completely different story than the book. But it was set in the same historical time period. So it was very jarring and really disappointing. Really disappointing. I just don't think they got this right. And it's very visually beautiful, the way they filmed it, the scenes, the atmosphere, the costuming, that's all very beautiful. But it was not Jane Austen's Persuasion. So those are my thoughts on that. I actually don't think I gave too many spoilers. All of Jane Austen's novels have happily ever afters, so don't be surprised by that. Okay, that's the one book I finished last week. I have a lot of books on the go. I'm actually now reading Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And so after this, I only have one more. I have Mansfield Park, and I'm going to try to read that by the end of the year, but I'm reading Northanger Abbey right now. I am still in the Unabridged Journals of Sylvia Plath on my Kindle. I am still very slowly working on the books of Jacq by Olga Tokarczuk, translated from the Polish by Jennifer Croft. And last night I just started Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. This is a story of two siblings, Byron and what is her name? Her nickname is Benny. So they are siblings who have just lost their mother, and their mother before her death went to her attorney, Mr. Mitch, and she recorded a tape to have both of the siblings be in the same room and listen to it at the same time. So that's kind of where I'm at in the story in the beginning of this one. So far, I really like the writing on that. That is it. So when you're watching this video on Saturday morning, we are getting ready to go out for a birthday lunch for my youngest daughter. Her birthday's not until Tuesday the 19th, but we're gonna go have fun and we're gonna eat Olive Garden and go shopping and all of it. So we're gonna have a really good time. No, that's when the video goes up on BookTube. Oh. She's getting her days mixed up. So I don't know if you heard her in the background. She's like, is that today? It's because no, I'm filming this on Friday, but we're going to be doing all this tomorrow on Saturday. So anyway, that's it for me for my bookish week. It was a short one. I finished one book, which is fine. I've got a bunch of stuff on the go. Oh, I'm listening to an audiobook too. The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared. That's the entire title. And I forget the author's name. He's a Swedish author. I will put a picture here so you can see what the book is. And I am reading that one for my Critical Chicks book group. Hope you guys are having a good week. Let me know in the comments below what you think of any of the books I discussed, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.